I'm Eva, and I would like to welcome you to another episode of The Charm of It, a podcast for knitters who share my fascination with the nitty-gritty details of our craft. If you're a returning viewer, it is so nice to see you again, and the little thistle cameo is for you. If you're a new viewer, I'm so glad that you found your way to my corner of the internet. You can expect a lot of projects in muted colors with intricate details and discussions about what goes into all of them. So, I record two different types of episodes. Project snapshots are only works in progress, and the full episodes like this week include finished objects as well as a bunch of other knitting related segments. Luckily, I don't have the insane amount of finished objects that I had last time I recorded, so I will have time to do quite a few segments. I'm going to do a yarn review, a book review, read to you from a different book that just happened to mention knitting. I need to come up with a better name for that segment. And answer a viewer question that was left in the Ravelry group that I have kind of given up on keeping up with, but I do still read it. Wow, I am a bit scatterbrained, but yeah, so that's what you can expect today. I am wearing a thrifted sweater, so I did not knit this, but it's definitely vintage, and the shape of it helped me decide how to shape the first sweater that I did knit by hand. But I am wearing hand knit fingerless mitts. These are my Lepidoptera mitts, which uses the underwing pattern. And you can see all the details on my Ravelry project page. I only knit these, I think, last month. Let's hope that the carpentry does not continue. So yeah, Thistle, my dog, is one of my co-hosts, and Moth the cat, who you saw her tail go past, is also here, so we have a full house. And let's get right into finished objects. I have 4, but I only have 2 of them physically with me. The other 2 were gifts, and they've already been dispatched. So first up is another gift knit. This one is just a simple hat. I mentioned a couple episodes ago that I am in the process of knitting a big collection of hats as gifts to strangers who live in my city who need some help keeping warm. We have very cold winters, so I have found a shelter that accepts 100% wool items for all ages. So I've been using Barocco Ultra Alpaca from my stash for the bodies, and then softer yarn for the brims. So this is Knit Picks Precioso in maybe the pollen colorway. It's the bright yellow one. So this is 100% merino wool. It's a single ply, kind of like Malabrigo worsted. And the Barocco Ultra Alpaca is 50% wool, 50% alpaca, also worsted weight. And this started out as a more cobalt blue, but I overdyed it to get the teal color. So this is the second hat I've knit with that skein. And here it is on. I just used the Barley Hat Pattern, which is free from Tin Can Knits, and it comes in a big variety of sizes. And as you can see, I made the brim extra long so that it can fit more size heads and so that the recipient can wear it either slouchy or fitted, their choice. That does mean that I leave an extra long end when I cast on for the brim of this, and then when I have the end to weave in, I use duplicate stitch to get it up the edge. I'm still using my new lens, by the way, so I can't put it really close to the camera, and I think what I'm going to start doing, because it hurts me anyway to hold my arms out, is to just put pictures here. So we'll see if I do that. But yeah, so I use duplicate stitch to go up one of the knit columns until I get to the body of the hat, and then I weave it in at the body instead. That way there's no visible ends, no matter how much they flip up the brim. So that was a nice, simple project. And the Precioso comes in 100-gram skeins, and this is the 3rd hat now. I've knit 3 hats out of each of the 2 colorways that I got, and I have enough left with both colors for a 4th hat. So that's really nice, since obviously you want to maximize how many hats you're getting out of your money when you're trying to keep people warm. So Once I finished these 2 skeins, I also ordered a skein of Quince & Company Osprey in just this steel gray, so that's what I'm going to use for adult hats, or, yeah, people who prefer muted colors. I guess I'll talk about my other 2 gift knits, photos here. I knit a smaller crow softie. You saw the first one that I knit last time, I think the last full episode, and my sister had requested one. As you can see, originally I was going to send her my big one. It's right here. But I became very attached to her. I've named her Nochinka, which is basically little knight in Russian. I studied Russian in college. I am not culturally like Russian American. So just clarifying for that. Although it'd be fun if I was, but not. Anyway, moving on. So I did not, and for my crow I held the yarn double to make it a nice, more substantial crow. And I didn't have enough yarn left to knit my sister a similar one, and I also didn't have any other black yarn in my stash because I don't wear black. And most of the people I knit for don't request black either. I have a lot of navy blue in my stash. Anyway, so I was going to send her this one and then just buy some black wool yarn and knit myself a replacement, but then I got too attached to Nochinka. So I went ahead and knit a smaller one out of the leftover black yarn that I had, which is Barocco Modern Cotton, which I had left over from skeins that a friend bought me ages ago so I could knit her a pair of arm warmers that went like all the way up. And I knit those and have plenty of yarn left over. So that one I sent home with my dad because he's going to see her, so that way I didn't have to pay postage fees. And it's really cute. It turned out about the same size as the regular pattern. And I used the Songbird pattern by Sarah Elizabeth Kellner, which is a free pattern on Ravelry, and it is so much fun to knit up. You can see the bird taking shape on your needles. It's really cleverly designed. Since it was a smaller crow, I used 6mm safety eyes. And yeah, my sister said she was fine with having a baby crow, and then I am going to go ahead and buy some more black yarn and knit her bigger crows for next Halloween. She really likes Halloween. She and my niece go all out with the decorations, so I know that she'll get a lot of use out of it. But yeah, I don't know, I got really attached to Nochinka, and I just was not willing to sacrifice her. Sacrifice is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. The third, I guess, gift finished object was a pair of mitts. I knit these for my friend Kristen, she actually lives in the same city as me, which is so nice. So we went to a fiber festival together, the Finger Lakes Fiber Festival, a few weeks ago, and she picked out some yarn for mitts that she wanted me to knit. And actually, when I posted these on Instagram, we follow each other on Instagram, she saw the mitts and asked if I could knit her a pair. And, you know, she was really sweet about it. It's not like she was like, you will knit me mitts. She gave me lots of outs, but I love knitting for people who are important to me, so I was more than happy to agree. So she bought that yarn, and here are the finished mitts. As you can see, she likes really fun, cheerful colors, and I really like how they turned out. The yarn is Fleece Artist, hand-dyed in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the base is Merino Slim, and the colorway is Painted Bunting. I don't usually have the tags to show you, but I thought this was such a pretty tag. And it came in like 113 gram or 4 ounce skein, which had 437 yards or 400 meters, so it's fingering weight. And I used a little less than half of it to make the mitts. Here you can see what it looks like all caked up. So the reason why I still have all the leftovers is because Kristen was wondering if I could also knit her a hat at some point, and I said sure. It'll probably be a little while because I have a schedule for gift knitting before Christmas, and I have so many personal projects I want to do as well, but more than happy to knit a matching hat, or I told her that if she wants to learn to knit, hats are excellent first projects, so we'll see how that goes. The pattern I used is another free pattern from Ravelry called the HG Mitts. I made a pair for myself maybe 2 years ago, and I love them. They're one of my favorite pairs of mitts. I wear them frequently. So I had texted her lots of potential choices, and she thought that a simpler pattern would be better because of the crazy yarn. Not crazy, but colorful yarn. And the only modification I made to the pattern, I even followed their directions for length and like the thumbs and all that, was the pattern includes columns of garter stitch or seed stitch alternating knit, purl. So one round you knit all the way around. The next round you knit 9, I think, and purl 1 around. And instead of purling 1 on those rounds, I slipped 1. So instead of having columns of garter stitch, it's columns of slip stitches. And I just did that because I have seen socks knit like that with variegated yarn, and I always think it looks really wonderful. So I thought that it would be nice to try that out with the mitts. And I have given them to Kristen. They fit her. She likes them. She's getting lots of compliments on them. So that was definitely a simple and easy thing to do for a friend. So success. My final finished object is for me. Because at heart, I am definitely a personal knitter. I don't like the phrase selfish knitting. I think that's ridiculous. I talked about this in an earlier episode. No one talks about selfish golfers. So I think it's a very gendered term. And therefore, I use the phrase personal knitting to talk about knitting for myself. So these are my blue stocking socks, and I am so in love with them that I think I've worn them 4 times since I finished them a little over a week ago, which means that they are covered in cat fur, and you guys are just going to have to overlook that. Here's as close as I can get. So I designed these myself. I don't think I've ever done that before, actually. And they're mainly striped with 2 different colors yarn. This is not self-striping. And then I added a little bit of stranded color work at the cuff and the toe, and then I did this really fun slip stitch pattern for the heel flap. Really, really love these, obviously, since I've been wearing them a lot. Okay, I wonder if I can prop them up. Oh, we don't want to cover up No Chingai or the pumpkins. No. So these are out of Quince & Company Finch, which is my favorite sock yarn. And it is 100% American wool. It is not superwash, and there's no nylon in it, and I've had no problems with how the socks have held up. I have quite a few pairs out of this yarn at this point. I reviewed it on an episode. You can search in YouTube, and you will find that. Okay, so the colorways are Peacoat for the navy and Fjord for the more medium blue. And I really love how they interact together. So I knit myself a pair of socks out of Peacoat, which you saw on the last full episode, and I had a bunch left over, so I knew I would be able to get stripy socks. And you can see I did a pretty short cuff, and that's because I want to be able to wear these with Oxfords or flats. I have like T-strap and loafer flats from Aurora Shoe Company, rather than with boots or underpants. I like to wear flat shoes and skirts, and I found that it's most flattering if the sock stops before my calf starts to really grow. And when I first started knitting socks, I mainly knit them long. So the socks that I've been knitting lately, I've been opting for shorter cuffs for that reason. And it took about, 25 grams of each color, which really surprised me pleasantly, which means that I actually have enough left over to knit a matching beret, which I'm definitely going to do. I have so many plans to knit berets with my leftover sock yarn, and then I never seem to get around to it. Let me check and see. I think it took 60 grams for the pair, so I will look up exactly how much for you. $32 grams of the Fjord and 25 grams of the Peacoat. I guess that makes sense since I did the cuff and toe in Fjord. The stockinette section is just knit on 56 stitches because that is my preference for stitch count when I'm knitting with Quince & Company Finch. I wear a US 6.5 to 7 or a European 37 think it's a UK 4, not positive. And I did, for the color work, I went up to 60 stitches just for those sections, and that worked really well, I think, because they don't look any bigger or any smaller. I went up to 60 because the motif I chose had a 20 stitch repeat, and I just chose it out of Alice Darmore's Fair Isle knitting book. Not the one that's like just charts, the one that includes all the Fair Isle stuff, because those charts are sorted by row count, and I knew that I wanted a 5-row motif so that I could do 2 plain rows on either side and still have it be fairly small. So it's just easier when you can look at only 5-row motifs. And I really love it. I love how it looks like a little bit of ribbon. I definitely think that I want to make more socks like this. So this heel flap, Barbara Walker's stitch dictionaries have a bunch of slip stitch patterns that use different colors of yarn. And I tried them out for the first time when I was knitting these crazy pairs of socks for Advent last year. And I knew that I wanted to try them for a more simple heel flap. So I got out that stitch dictionary and I tried 3 different patterns before settling on this one, which is dotted ladders. And it's really simple, and since it's a slip stitch pattern, it also reinforces that heel flap at the same time. So that's good. And yeah, I really like how it kind of had the vertical stripes to contrast with the horizontal stripes. I included the link to the stitch pattern on knittingfool.com on the project page in case you want to try it on your next pair of socks. I would definitely recommend it. As far as the jog, here, we'll have to take it off, because when you're knitting in the round and you're doing your own stripes instead of self-striping, there is the jog issue. So all I did was slip the first stitch on the second round of each color stripe. So you knit one round with the new color, and then on that second round you slip it. And that definitely helps with the jog. I can have you compare and contrast. I know I said I was going to do photos, but I guess this is habitual. So on the sole, I didn't bother doing anything, just ignore all the cat fur. And so there's the difference between whether you do the jogless stripe method or not. So it does help, but it is also not perfect. I would be bothered by this if it was a sweater, but on the back of my foot with socks, I don't think it really matters. I had left long ends. I was going to experiment with duplicate stitching the ends to fix the stripes afterwards that way, but I think if I was going to do that, I shouldn't have slipped stitches, because when I tried to duplicate stitch it, it just still looked wonky, so I gave up on that plan. Now you can see Olive Moth. She's being quite accommodating today. So those are my finished objects, and I've really enjoyed the ones that are for me, and I've enjoyed gifting the ones that are for other people. So I think I will read to you next just from the little excerpt that had to do with knitting. All my stuff is over on there. So this book is called Help for the Haunted, and I don't remember the author. Let me read you the passage and then I'll tell you more about the book. Okay. So the context is a girl is thinking about the basement of her house, which is where her parents kept their work. And their work is as demonologists or exorcists. Okay. So she's headed down into the basement. Again I followed, breathing in the musty air and gazing around at the cinder block walls. In one corner, the beginnings of a partition separated a small area by the sliding glass door. My father had long ago begun constructing those walls, only to give up on the project. Through the sloppy cage of 2x4s and snarled wires, I watched as my sister navigated among the heap of bicycles, forgotten dental chair, and on deeper into the shadows. While she did who knew what over there, I studied my father's new desk and file cabinet, a compact TV and VCR on top. It's set in the 80s. A hulking bookshelf had been positioned in front of the cavity in the wall that led to the crawl space, the shelves filled with boxes they'd yet to unpack, a basket of cassettes and a tape player, a few stray videotapes. My mother never cared for sitting at a desk, so she kept a wooden rocker there. The cushions tied to the seat and spindled back were worn thin, her knitting basket situated nearby so she could occupy her hands whenever they discussed their work. a knitting demonologist. That's kind of fun. So I said that I would tell you more about the book. It's by John Searles. I got it from my library as an ebook and read it on my Kindle. It is wonderful. If you are looking for a creepy book to read, since Halloween is coming up, but not so disturbing that you're going to have terrible nightmares or that it needs to come with trigger warnings, then this is a truly excellent book. It's got all these great motifs. It's got an evil doll, it has, ghosts, it has troubled adolescent girls and possible paranormal activity from that. It has a murder mystery. The main narrator she falls into that weird girl detective category. I'm not sure if that's a common phrase or if that's just my book blogging friend Bina who uses that, but quirky and willing to do and determined to solve the mystery and willing to do things that adults would probably not do in order to solve that mystery. And there's definitely an air of unease and uncertainty throughout the book, but it's not going to traumatize you. So it was a perfect Halloween read for me. And it's about a girl in the 1980s, as I said, who lives in a small town with her older sister and her parents who work as demonologists or exorcists. And at the very beginning, the parents get killed. And the girl might have seen something, but she was knocked on the head by the killer. And so after that, you flash forward a year, and so she's going about trying to figure out how to live her life with, now the only family she has is her 19-year-old sister, who's definitely not ready to be raising children. And the girl is 14 or 15, I think. And at the same time, she's trying to figure out what happened to her parents because she's a key witness in the murder trial that's about to begin. She's also, amongst that timeline, there's a lot of flashbacks being told, so it's switching back and forth, and I think that's a great way to build tension and narrative. So I just read it. I could not stop turning the pages. It was so well written, and even though it's written by a male author, I think he got the voice of, a 14, 15-year-old girl just spot on. I was very impressed with him, and my mother agrees. I recommended it to her, and she has been racing through it as well. So if you are looking for a good Halloween read, Help for the Haunted by John Searles is definitely one that I would highly recommend. And as I said, even though it deals with troubled teenage girls and a challenging family home situation, it does not need a trigger warning. I'm always wary of books like that, and if it's going to turn out that the girl's being abused, I'm not going to go into more details because you know what I mean, and I know that some people watch with their kids, but you don't need to worry about that in this book. That's why I waited till I'd finished reading it to recommend it on Instagram, just in case. So, on to a yarn review. These are socks that I knit last spring, I think April or May, and they are made out of an independently dyed yarn, and I thought that I would review this yarn because Saskia, who is the dyer, I've noticed that I've been seeing more and more about her yarn, and she just opened her Etsy shop shortly after I had knit these socks, and so I thought it might be nice for people to see how the socks wear up. So Saskia is Dutch. I think she lives in Germany, but she, in addition to doing these absolutely beautiful dyeing, it's very important to her to find bases that are environmentally friendly and have a lower carbon footprint and celebrate local things, that kind of stuff. So this sock yarn, which she sent me so that I could knit up and tell her what I thought of it and then take photos for her to use. And we connected over Instagram because I was lamenting the lack of non-superwashable sock yarn, so that's why she sent it to me. Okay, so this is the Kempis Heideskaap, which is a particular breed of sheep. It's a Dutch breed, hence my mangling of the name. I will include the information you need in the show notes. So it's 75% that breed of wool and then 25% polyamide, which is just another way of saying nylon. And it's quite a lightweight fingering weight. I don't have the exact specifics, but my socks took 65 grams, and that's 357 yards. So, and it comes in 100 yard skeins, so, or 100 gram skeins. So that must be, what, almost 500 yards in a 100 gram skein. This is another one where I'm like, I should knit a hat with the leftovers. Okay, so I really am impressed with this sock yarn. I will say right off the bat that if you are not able to wear a variety of wools, like if you are very, very sensitive to wool, this is not going to be the wool for you, at least not for next to the skin, because it definitely has a bit of toothiness to it. However, if you can wear yarns like Regia or Zitron or all of those, I would say that this is less irritating than those, just for context. Or West Yorkshire Spinners, their sock yarn, the BFL one, that makes my ankles notice it more than these socks do. So hopefully that helps you decide where you are on the wool sensitivity spectrum. And I actually think these would make absolutely beautiful sweaters as well as socks if you could wear them. I don't think I could wear this in a sleeve, just because it makes a very strong but also very lightweight fabric, which is exactly what you want in a sweater. And Saskia has the most beautiful color range, and she's lately added, basically you can request your own dyes of all these different colors. So I think that that would be wonderful for if you needed more than one skein. You're not, at the mercy of what's going to happen in a shop update. I think for yarn reviews, it's important that I get as close to the camera in video as I can so that you can see the state of the finished object that I'm showing you. So that's why I am now standing up in front of the camera so that you can see that these socks have held up really well. There's a small amount of pilling right on the heel flap, but those could be picked off really easily, and the underlying fabric is still perfectly whole. And there's absolutely no signs of wear on the sole. Here, I'll show you the other one on my hand. It's the downside of sock blockers. Okay. This lens has a different distance for focusing, but there you go. You can see the sole. And there has been, I think that they look really beautiful. As I said, I knit these about a year ago, and I have to wait until it's a little cooler to wear them because otherwise they can itch me if I wear them in too warm weather. So I would say that I probably wear them October through March here. So they've definitely gotten wear because they're so beautiful. I can't tell you how many times I've worn them, though. I don't track those kinds of things. But yeah, so I am very impressed with how this yarn has held up. When I was knitting, I wasn't sure if the thinner fabric would end up creating, any kind of problems just because the yarn is thinner. I knit these on size 0s because that's how I always knit my socks. I'm not sure what the actual gauge ended up being. It looks like it's about 8 stitches to the inch. I could measure, I guess. I don't know where my ruler is. But yeah, so I think this yarn looks especially beautiful in lace patterns. That's what I ended up using for the sock. I tried a few different options. I tried it in twisted stitches, and the pattern just disappeared. But that might be because of the variation, the variegated colorway. I'm not used to knitting with variegated yarn. But I think it just shines in this lace pattern. I find these one of my most beautiful pairs of socks. They're so pretty. Okay. And yeah, so that is my yarn review of Campus Heideskeppe. Don't speak any German or Dutch or any of those languages. And you can find this yarn over at Saskia's Etsy shop, which is Ovis, etc., which it took me a while to realize that Ovis is the genus for sheep. So that's the scientific name for sheep is Ovis Aries. I'm an Aries. So that is, I'm sure, the inspiration behind her name. And she has quite a few other yarn bases, and none of them are superwash, and so I just think that's wonderful because so many indie dyers rely mainly on superwash. She is based in Europe, of course, so if you're in the US, you know, yarn's gonna have to go a ways to you, but this one, and I think all of her bases, are locally milled and spun. You know, I think in Britain but Britain is very close to Holland and Germany in this scheme of things. I mean, all of continental Europe versus the entire US, you know, landmass size. I'm rambling. So what I'm saying is there's not a big carbon footprint that goes into making the yarn, and so I think in this case flying it across the Atlantic is not a super heinous thing to do. Environmental things are always so tricky, aren't they? But yeah, and I think it's this yarn, but I know at least one of her bases uses wool that was previously just being disposed of. So I really love Saskia's philosophy and her ethics and how committed she is to them, and she's also just an incredibly beautiful artist when it comes to the color work. When it comes to dyeing the colorways. And so I would highly recommend her if you are interested in indie dyed yarn but prefer to buy more environmentally friendly yarn rather than kind of the MCN type bases. Okay, viewer question. She asked, she's thinking about a sweater quantity of yarn. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. And she said that I've used both Quince and Elsawool, and would I recommend one over the other for sweaters? And she also asked what episodes I reviewed those yarns in, and the answer is, I don't know. I don't have an index of my episodes. However, if you search my YouTube channel, you'll pull them up because I do the show notes below. So I have reviewed Quince Tern in the context of sweaters and Elsawool generally. So if you do a search for those, it'll come up. Okay, so as I said, the only Quince yarn, well, other than Sparrow, which is a linen yarn, but presumably you're looking at wool, that I have used in sweaters is Tern, which is their 75% American wool, 25% Tussah silk yarn. I've used it for 2 sweaters now, and I just ordered a sweaters quantity for my 3rd Tern sweater, and I love it. If I could only knit with, well, see, that's the thing. Meanwhile, I've used Elsawool for 2 sweaters, and am working on my 3rd. And if I could only use 2 sweater yarns, those are the 2 that I would use. But it's difficult to choose between them because they are very different yarns. Elsawool, the ones that I've used are Woollen Spun, and they are undyed, they're in sheepy colors, and so they're very soft and velvety, and they kind of look a little more country style, right? More rustic. Whereas Quince Tern is a worsted spun silk wool blend, so it's much smoother and it gives a more polished looking fabric, and it comes in a variety of different colors, and because the wool absorbs the dye in a different way than the silk, the colors look heathered, which I love. This is probably why I've knit several sweaters out of Quince & Company Tern and have yet to try their 100% wool for sweaters. Although I really want to try, especially Chickadee, and I'm knitting one with Finch right now. Okay, but back to the question. So, I would enthusiastically recommend both of those for sweaters, assuming that you have a similar wool sensitivity to me. If the only wool you can wear is superwash merino, then both of these will probably bother you. Or if even superwash merino is touch and go, then these will definitely bother you. But if you find that you can wear some wools but not others, then these will probably be okay with you. That's the camp that I am in. They're both, I don't know, I just love them both. And the other thing is the Elsawool is going to create warmer sweaters than Quince & Company Tern because Woollen Spun yarn captures more air, which leads to more insulation. And of course it's 100% wool, whereas the Quince & Company yarn is 25% silk, which is not as warm as wool. to me, that silk is another reason why I love Tern for sweaters, because I tend to run warm anyway. So that just means that I can wear my Tern sweaters in warmer weather than I would be able to wear 100% wool. So essentially, I don't think you can go wrong with either. It depends on the type of sweater you want to knit. And you can look up my review episodes to see how those yarns behave in different stitch types. So lace, cables, just plain stockinette, textured knit purl type things, twisted stitches. I've shown examples of all of those because I've used both those yarns quite a bit. So I would say first think about what kind of sweater you're dreaming of, and then you can pick one of those two yarns accordingly. They're at about the same price range depending on what size you are. I think the Elsawool, I can get a sweater out of 2 skeins of their fingering weight, which is $40 to $50, and Tern, I can hopefully get away with 5 skeins, which is just under $50, but I'm also thinking I might need to start buying a 6th for insurance. And the shipping is a little cheaper at Quince than at Elsawool, but financially they're about on the same level. And they're both made entirely in the U.S. of U.S. wool. I think the silk is imported, but they're spun in the U.S., or at least on North America. Elsawool might be Canadian mill. But yeah, so there you have it. I hope that that helps answer your question. It really depends on what type of sweater you want as far as which one. Neither is better than the other. They're both just wonderful. For the topic this week, I'm going to talk about buttons, which was suggested by Megan. She is Megan Gold on Instagram, which is where we talk most, and she's the one who introduced me to Rose Witchery, who is an artist who makes incredible drawings of kind of Victorian Gothic witchy things, but she has quite a few that include fiber arts kind of stuff, so I am grateful to her to that. So Megan said, I'm curious of how you go about choosing buttons for your cardigans. I know this seems like the most simple thing in the world, and it can be, but oftentimes I find myself dreaming of lace weight / light fingering cardigans, and when I'm picking buttons, I usually think, won't these be way too heavy or pull at the fabric? Will these wear well over time, etc.? I love buttons, and I think they can make or break a sweater, and I just find myself thinking about this too often. Okay, so since I knit almost entirely cardigans these days, in case you're a new viewer, the reason I do that is because I have mobility issues, and so it's easier for me, I have chronic illnesses that cause mobility issues, so it's easier for me to put a cardigan on and off than to pull a jumper, sweater, pullover up and down over my head, and because I use heating pads to help my pain levels, I need to be able to take my sweaters on and off during the day, so that is why I mainly knit cardigans these days. I only knit pullovers if they are lace weight, or I guess non-wool fibers, that would be fine. But so I've had to think a lot about buttons, and I generally find that for me, I mainly knit fingering weight cardigans. I haven't knit a lace weight cardigan yet. I've only knit lace weight jumper. I tend to go for a 5/8 inch around their button size, which is 16 millimeters. So that's generally the size that I find looks best and proportional and works with my button bands, which I usually knit to between 1 and 1.5 inches, which is 2.5 to 3 centimeters. I guess I could just say 25 to 30 millimeters. Oh, that seems so much nicer without the decimal points. So as far as size goes, that's what I opt for. As far as shank versus holes, I'm going to need some visual aids for this. 1 minute. I have ransacked my sweater drawer. Okay, so these are, actually, I'll probably show it better with this one. These are shank buttons. You can't see the thread that's sewn them on. The button is solid on the front, and it's got this little thing on the back with a hole in it. That's called the shank, and that's what you use to sew through. And the other types of buttons are just the ones with holes, and so you can see the thread that you're sewing through, and the button is flatter, whereas the shank buttons are a little more 3D. So, in my experience, shank buttons lead to wavy button bands. For a while I thought that shank buttons would be a great solution because when you're sewing flat buttons onto a hand-knit cardigan, the fabric is thicker than it would be on most store-bought cardigans, and so you end up needing to make a little thread shank. So all you do is when you're sewing the button on, you don't pull super snugly, and then when you've sewed enough that it's secure, you take the needle and you wrap it under the button, just a little base, so that the button, I'll insert a photo, like it's got this little thread base, and that means that the button is not super flat against the fabric, so when you need to put it through the button band, there's space for that button band to sit flat. So having always done that, I thought, hey, shank buttons, they come with their own, and so that would solve the problem. And that's would be true, except the problem is that the shank is always quite narrow, so you need to make a buttonhole that's wide enough to get over the top of the button. But then once you have it buttoned up, the part of the button that's touching the buttonhole is much more narrow. And so there's not as much heft there to stop that hole from stretching out. I don't know if this makes sense. It's just something that I've noticed, is that the sweaters that I have used, the flat hole kind of buttons, I don't have as many issues with the button band waving out, and I don't have issues with it unbuttoning itself, like the buttons popping out of holes. I don't have that problem with these kinds of buttons. So in future, I'm only buying these kinds of buttons. So that's my first, well, second, I guess, after size. Almost all of these sweaters have around 5/8, 7-inch, or 16mm buttons. You can't see all the sweaters in my lap. The only one that I think is a bit bigger are these, because I fell in love with them. And you can tell that they're quite a prominent design feature. As far as material goes, I have used glass buttons. These are glass buttons, and this is a light fingering weight yarn. It's canopy fingering, and I knit it at 8 stitches to the inch. And these are pretty substantial buttons. They're glass and they're larger, but they don't pull the fabric at all. They don't droop. I was a little worried, honestly. I sewed them on thinking, maybe I'll have to replace them with other buttons, but I have not had a problem with the button being too heavy for the fabric. Now, I've never used ceramic buttons, which I think might be heavier than glass, but yeah, there you go. And this button band is just a ribbed button band, which provides a bit more substance, but as you can see, this is a really drapey fabric, and those buttons are perfectly fine. So this one I also used glass buttons, and this is actually one of my Tern sweaters, but these buttons are much lighter, even though they're also glass. I'm not really sure. It seems like glass ones can vary in weight quite a bit. I got both of these from an Etsy seller in Germany who sells vintage glass buttons. And yeah, I'm not sure if it's just the size that makes the difference, or if there are different kinds of glass that was used in button manufacturing. If you're worried about weight, of course, plastic and wood are probably your best choices. So I think this is the only sweater where I've used wooden buttons. And this is another light fingering weight. I also knit this at 8 stitches to the inch, and I probably should have knit it even more tightly, to be honest, because the yarn is quite fine. So there is a wooden button, and that causes absolutely no problems at all. It's certainly lighter weight. And there they are. And then I've used shell buttons, which are also lightweight, and I love how they look. However, they do draw a lot of attention to themselves. You can see that in like this vintage sweater that I'm wearing. Your eye just goes straight to the shell buttons. There's something about their brightness. So I have quite a few sets of shell buttons in my button stash, and I always want to put them on sweaters, and then whenever I do like line them up, I end up going for other options because they just steal the show. So depending on the kind of colors that you use to knit with, that might or might not be a consideration. The other thing I found is that metal buttons, even if you get the pewter ones or like the darker bronze ones, and they don't look that shiny when you're looking at them like in your hand or on the bag, once you sew them onto the cardigan, they tend to be extra shiny because they're catching light. So that can also upstage your knitting. This sweater originally had metal buttons, silver ones, and they were just making it so that you didn't even see all the pretty cables. So I switched them out for plastic ones. And as you can see, I opted for a kind of iridescent plastic. I have to buy my buttons online because I don't have a car. I get around by a walking and bus, and there's no like craft store within easy reach of that. I would have to be on like 3 buses for 2 hours. So when you're buying online, it's trickier to match colors, of course. So I was hoping the iridescence would help make it look more like it matched, and I think that that worked well. I also think it makes the plastic buttons look better quality when there's a bit of depth to them. Since I had to get up anyway to start a new segment, here's a close-up of my heaviest glass buttons on a light fingering weight sweater. And it's really not too bad. Like, they hang down a bit. I think that's because of the shank, but they're not distorting the button size. Or, sorry, they're not distorting the button band. But, and then there is what wooden buttons look like, you know, on another light fingering weight sweater. So, lighter weight, but still working. Yeah, so these are also, I did plastic, but they kind of change in color so they look a bit fancier. Of course, you want to pay attention to how your buttons are supposed to be cleaned. I don't machine wash any of my wool sweaters anyway, but I do machine wash my linen cardigans that I knit. And so when I'm picking buttons for those, I make sure that those are also machine washable because, you know, it would be really sad if I destroyed my buttons in the wash. I've been a little hesitant to use a lot of wooden buttons because I don't know if the sweater's soaking in the sink for, 30 minutes or so is going to cause a lot of problems to the wood or not. I'd love to hear from you if you use a lot of wooden buttons and soak your sweaters to wash them. Because I love the look of wooden buttons. I love how organic it is. But I've been a little hesitant because of that. And when the thread shows, I know I've talked about this before, but it was a while ago. When I'm sewing buttons on, I have this little stash of embroidery floss that I got at a garage sale, like $1 for a stuffed envelope years and years ago. And it's not like I embroider or anything, so I just picked it up because who could resist that? But it turns out to be absolutely perfect for sewing buttons onto hand-knit sweaters because you can combine these shades of floss to get a color that either matches the buttons better or matches your sweater better. And since it's going to show, that's kind of important. So, for instance, in the case of this, I held 2 different colors of embroidery floss together to sew on these buttons. Oh, and I can show you the thread shank now. Okay. So, oh, my giant hands. Do you see how there's that little kind of circle of thread underneath the button? That's made by, so the last time that you're sewing the buttons on the normal way, you put the needle down through the buttonhole but not through the fabric. And then you just wrap the needle like this. I think I do it about 10 or 15 times. And then you put the needle through the fabric, and that makes that little shank. So then it's really easy to button the fabric through the button band. Oops, was that actually a buttonhole? There we go, buttonhole, through the buttonhole. And yeah, so here's the, and you can see that these are also a bit shiny, so they do still draw a little bit of attention to themselves, but not so much that they're upstaging the cables. I love these buttons. I think that they're so incredibly beautiful, even if they do like to pop out a bit of those buttonholes. But yeah, I need to knit more light, more cream or light gray sweaters just so I can use more shell buttons because, ugh, they're so beautiful. As I mentioned, I mainly buy my buttons online. And of course, when you're ordering things like buttons, usually the shipping costs as much as the buttons themselves. So usually I look and try to find 2 or 3 sets of buttons that I like and that I think will work for upcoming sweaters when I place the order, just so that the shipping cost, you know, is a bit more reasonable. I usually use Etsy as my source for buttons, and I almost always do the search to vintage only, because that way I feel like I'm having less of an environmental impact. And there's still lots of options. Honestly, I feel like a lot of times things were made better back then for a variety of reasons, and so I feel like I'm probably getting better quality as well. And yeah, I can include a list of some of the Etsy sellers that I've gotten really wonderful buttons from if you are interested. As I said, since I know my preferred size now, that makes it easier. It used to be I would wait to order buttons until I was done with the sweater, and then I would just use buttons that I have in my little button jar and lay them out along the sweater in different sizes to see which ones I liked best before I knew what size I was going to gravitate towards. So obviously I wasn't buying in bigger bulk then. I use 8 to 10 buttons usually on a cardigan. My cardigans are cropped, so they stop at my natural waist, but I am long-waisted. So my cardigans are usually about 18 inches long, which is 45 centimeters. So in case that helps. So I try to make sure, these days I try to make sure that I have at least 9. I do have a few sets that only have 8, but I've noticed that if I do 9 or 10 buttons, I tend to also have fewer problems with button bands gaping. So in the future, I will definitely make sure that I'm buying sets. The other place where I've gotten buttons is just when I'm visiting my family for Christmas, and they all have cars and stuff. So if we pop into a Joann's or Michael's, which are just big craft stores here, then I'll look at the buttons there. But I haven't bought them in a while. I needed to buy buttons really early in my knitting career, and I happened to go to Joann's on a 40% off sale, so I picked up several button sets there. But that was, so I'm still using some of those buttons, so that's nice. But that was before I realized I needed to be buying quantities of 8 to 10. So yeah, I have gotten them there, and they seem to work just as well. So hopefully that helps a little bit in the button use. So finally, book review time. This is Japanese Knitting Stitch Bible by Hitomi Shida, who is a Japanese knitter / wizard. So this is a fascinating stitch dictionary. All of the stitches were created by her. And I've known about Japanese stitch dictionaries for a long time, but they were only available in Japanese, and they're charted, so that's not a huge deal. But they also tended to be very pricey, like $40 to $50, and I just couldn't bring myself to spend that much. So I saw that Gayle Roehm was coming out with a translation. This is from Tuttle Publishing. I got it on Amazon pre-order for like $11.50. It's listed for $17, and even at full price, this is a steal. As you can see, this is a large book, and it is beautiful. All of the pages are glossy. Let me show you the pages without charts on them. All of the pages are glossy and full color throughout the book. It's beautifully laid out. It has so much information. It's got tutorials at the end, which include both photographs and diagrams. And let me show you, I guess I'll show you one of the pages of the charts. Hopefully you could see this if you opted to look inside of Amazon, just so that you can see that the charts are also really beautifully laid out with photographs next to the stitches. So this is a really well-made, beautiful book. Yeah, all the pages are glossy and in full color and shiny. The only issue I have with it is that it is, I think, a glue-bound book, and so I hope the pages don't fall out over time. And as you can see, it stays open pretty well, but not the way that a spiral-bound book would be. But that is literally my only complaint with the publishing of this, with the physical amount of this book. I have absolutely no complaints with the rest of it, which I will tell you about when I start my next segment. If you're a new viewer, when I say segment, when I keep saying I'm going to start a new segment, it's because my camera only records in 8 to 10 minute increments. Like, it's not the actual, different knitting podcast segment thing. Realize that that's ambiguous. So this book is amazing. I want to knit everything in it, all of the time. It's only charted. If you don't like charts, this is not going to be the book for you. However, I find the charts very intuitive. I did read, there's a whole bunch of pages in the beginning with Guide to Symbols. It starts on page 7 and goes through page 17. However, most of the symbols are only used in 1 or 2 stitch patterns. And she lists which stitch patterns it is. I mean, this book is really brilliantly held out. So all the pictures, they show you the symbol, they tell you how to knit it, and then they tell you what stitch patterns it's in. Isn't that brilliant? And the most common ones she lists first, and those are the ones that you're going to see in a lot of the stitches. And then if there's something weird going on that doesn't make sense, then you can refer back. But if you're used to reading charts, these will make a lot of sense to you. Let's see. The patterns are incredibly beautiful. It's difficult because I can't show you most of them because they're right next to their charts. But there's a lot, I would say most of them have open work in them. If you're not a fan of fabric that has yarn overs, then this book is going to be less useful to you. But they're not, most of them aren't what I would call traditional lace. Like, a lot of them include cables or traveling stitches or texture as well as lace. She's a big fan of baubles, so there are quite a few baubles in here. And I'm not usually a fan of baubles, but I'm kind of impressed by how she uses baubles. Plus, it would be really easy to leave those out. So that's the beginning of the book. You have it divided into lacy patterns, and then that's further subdivided into with baubles, with leaves, with scallops, with smocking, bead embroidery. The next chapter is overall patterns and crossing stitches. So that's, you're going to find a lot of yarn overs, but that has more twisted stitches and cables and some general textures. And then the next chapter is pattern panels. So these are ones that go vertically up and down, and they include cables, lace, and twisted stitches. So that's the first section, which are just all these jaw-dropping stitches that you can use with whatever you like, right? Oh, and I forgot to say, all of the charts, they tell you, not only are the charts numbered, so the squares are numbered in sets of 5, which makes it so much easier to read, but underneath each chart, it tells you how big a repeat is. So, like, this one is repeat equals 22 stitches and 40 rows. How wonderful is that? It gets so tiresome having to, like, count on a graph to see how big a stitch pattern is. So, as I said, I think this is an incredibly well thought out book as far as usability goes. Okay, so after that, there's this great chapter where she shows you side by side a stitch pattern and then how she changes it. It's called arrangements, but I think perhaps modification would be a better word choice. So she shows you how to do little things. I bet if I just hold it up partway, there, now you can't see the chart. So, like, she shows you how to add bobbles, take away bobbles, make it so that it's just one repeat, give it a border of a different stitch. So basically she's showing you how you can take these already beautiful stitch patterns and then change them up. Like this one has a different texture going on in the middle of the diamond. So she's teaching you basically how to make up your own stitch patterns, which is amazing. And then there is the round yokes chapter, which I already was completely in love with this book. And then I hit this chapter and I almost died because it's so amazing. So, in this one, the charts are on a separate page, so I can show them to you. In this one, she takes various stitch patterns and then she decreases them in pattern or increases. I think it depends on the chart. But look at that. Oh my gosh. So you can either use one of these directly, and I mean there are endless applications for this, like waist shaping in sweaters, calf shaping in knee-high socks, crown shaping in hats, of course as a round yoke, you know, as a yoked sweater with texture instead of stranded color work. But think about all the times when you need to increase or decrease. And I just love this section. Oh my gosh. Because I feel like I'm going to have an apprenticeship in how to decrease or increase creatively while still maintaining stitch patterns. Because she does it in a whole variety of ways, like scale or that kind of thing. So, yeah. And there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 of those. And they're fully charted from beginning to end. So none of that, you know, decrease while maintaining pattern stuff. You can see exactly how she does it. Peplums for cardigans. Oh my gosh, so much potential. A skirt. Yeah. And then the final chapter, which is also lovely, is edgings. And this one is also set up so that you can see all the stitches first and then look at the charts later. So I love that edgings are included because that way, if you're doing a fancy thing, you can match your cuffs. And what's really cool is it's divided into what the edging is based on. So it's divided into based on 1x1 ribbing, 2x2 ribbing, and garter stitch. And there's the straight edgings. And then there's also these adorable little pleated edgings, which would be perfect for a peplum on a sweater or like a frill on a mitt. And that's the book. This just came out. As I said, I did a pre-order from Amazon, so it was at my door on this Tuesday, which is when it was released. So I've not yet been able to actually use it to knit with, but oh my gosh. Just for reading and inspiration and knowledge and learning, this book has completely blown me away. It's incredible, and it's worth much more. Like, if I had been able to see this, even when it was in Japanese, I would have paid $40 for it because it's just incredible. So, that is my very, very enthusiastic review. I love this book. I'm so glad it's mine. When I mentioned earlier that I just ordered another Sweaters Quantity of Quince & Company Tern, I ordered it knowing that this book was going to be at my doorstep soon. So hopefully I will get to start using the stitches. I'm also going to design a pair of lacy knee-high socks for my mom. That was her Christmas request. Not the designing part. The lacy knee-high socks was her Christmas request. And she's very small, so there aren't many knee-high sock patterns available that would fit her. And, you know, lace just makes fabric bigger. So I knew that I was probably going to have to make it up myself or at least do a lot of modifications. So once I see this, oh, she's going to have the best knee-high socks ever, especially with that calf shaping. I adore this book. And if you enjoy designing your own things or taking a plain pattern and adding embellishment to it, you will adore this book as well. If you want to learn how to increase and decrease in pattern by admiring a master at it, you will also adore this book. If you have a minimalist style and you mainly knit stockinette garments, this is not the book for you. And it does include a few patterns for actual projects, but that's not the point of the book at all. I mean, I'm sure that I'll look at them to see how she adapts it, but the point is all those stitches and then all of the extra bits. So, it has been so nice spending time with you again. Since you already saw the pets and they are quite comfortably napping on the couch next to me, I won't bother them this time. You got to see them quite a bit at the beginning. As always, I love to hear from you. Comments here on YouTube or on Instagram and Ravelry. I'm the charm of it. As I said, there is a Ravelry group, but it's not really active. I mainly only leave it open in case I need to start threads for things. I do see and read comments when you leave them there, but it's just too much for me to try to keep up with lots of different areas. So I will see you in another week. Bye!